welcome Coach John. Coach John is here with us today in the 2040 podcast, and he'll be sharing with us more insights on reconciliation. But of course, you have an exciting title, well known over the internet. Why are you called Coach John? Well, let's begin with that.
I think a coach is someone who helps someone else unlock their potential. And so I have a couple of different pieces of paper with my name on it, I'll say, but I think I most identify with the title of coach. I think that I've often felt myself identifying with the biblical character of Daniel. I'll call him an advisor to royalty. I seem to have this gift to see and read and understand people in a way that I can't always fully explain. But what's kind of exciting as a coach is I feel like I see great potential in people, and maybe my stewardship of this gift is to kind of help people unlock that they see in them. Because so often, like, I believe that each one of us is born with gifts, but oftentimes because it's sort of inherent or native to ourselves, we may not always appreciate that they are gifts, and we may not even feel like we have something special. And so I think as a coach, I like to help people unlock their potential. And so I love having that as a title. I used to have a lot of temper tantrums, and I look at it now through my lens of understanding through education and lived experience. And I realized that I was reading people, again, not in a psychic or clairvoyant way, but I could just kind of understand cues and patterns and behavior and language and tones and expressions and things very, very deeply. I felt things deeply, and so I would kind of absorb the energy or stress of others around me. I'm very empathetic by nature, and at some point in time, all that big emotional stuff had to go somewhere. It needed a pressure release, and so it would show up in the form of a temper tantrum or some kind of emotional meltdown. And my parents, of course, bless their hearts, they didn't fully understand what to do with me either. And so it's one of those things where sometimes life hands us a gift, but we don't know that it's a gift, and we don't know what to do with it. And then life has to take us through some experiences to help us to realize what that gift actually is, what its potential is, what its limitations are, and then what can be done with it when we give it over to the stewardship of God.
Let's continue with the other questions. I am glad you're not into psychic. In my world of understanding, I call that discernment, the spirit of discernment. When you use it, when it is from God, and when you use it to glorify God.
That's a wonderful way to think about it.
Yes. So, would you like to share with us what you understand by reconciliation in line with your own experience?
Yeah. Coming back to something that was severed or broken or damaged. Often in this case, it could be a relationship. And so in my own lived experience, I've experienced a number of different losses and traumas, and I recognize that this is not unique to me. This is an all too common lived experience of many people. And so in my case, I went through, I'll just describe one, just very briefly, one particularly notable incident. When I was living in South Africa, I was attacked, violently beaten, nearly died. And in that experience, obviously it was very, very traumatic to go through, and I was not equipped to sort of deal with the fallout or the aftermath of it. And I really felt like I lost myself, my sense of self, who I am, who I saw myself to be. Fell into some unhelpful patterns of behavior to try to cope with what I was experiencing, because I didn't really have the language or words to it. And it started this sort of long journey back of maybe not trying to find myself again, but like, who am I, and where do I belong in this world, and how do I, as a man of faith, like, why am I doing things that are harming me or hurting me? And it was a lot of difficult questions and feeling lost. And yet in all of it, I recognized that I was never actually abandoned by God, but I felt also deeply ashamed of who I was, who I'd become, and what I was struggling with. And as such, I probably created distance between myself and God, not quite like the prodigal son, but maybe a little bit like that. And I feel like reconciliation was me coming back to God, saying, I've had a really hard time here, and I've somehow not given you the opportunity to help me in the way that I should. It's like God said to me, you're a cerebral Christian, you're a thinking Christian, but you haven't given me your heart. And so I really had to kind of find my way back and rebuild that relationship in a way that maybe at a depth that I never had before that.
Sorry about what happened to you in South Africa. Before we go too far, what exactly was taking place?
So we were working for an NGO, non-governmental organization, working with underprivileged youth, helping to teach life skills and kind of prepare them for careers and employment, typically in the hospitality industry. So we really loved our work, we loved what we were doing, but just one night I was going back to the instructor's cabin on this nature reserve, and There was three guys inside the cabin when I opened the door, which kind of surprised me. And there was a fourth guy that I didn't see. And the fourth guy who was outside smashed me across the head with a rock or something. The other guys kind of jumped up from the table. They were drinking tea and eating rusks, rooibos tea and eating rusks, which is very common in South Africa. And they just started kicking and stomping and beating on me. And the intention was to gradually just beat me to death. And the cabin was kind of far enough away from like where everybody else was, the students and my wife and things like that. And so they had knives as well. And for some reason I didn't get stabbed. Call it divine intervention. That's going to be my explanation for it. As well as, how do you get the strength to fight off four guys after being concussed and badly beaten. But so somehow in that experience, God spared me, but it was obviously a very difficult one to go through. I managed to get to where everybody else was in one of the other buildings. So I'd been attacked. We didn't know how many men were out there. And I remember just having the thought, like, I can't die tonight. I can't die tonight because my soul will be in hell. And that's a very intense thought to have. It's a very kind of intense realization. I actually often think about words from Daniel that said, you've been weighed in the balances and found wanting. It's not that I wasn't necessarily a Christian. It was kind of like I described. I was a Christian on the surface. I was a Christian in my brain, but maybe not necessarily in my heart. And this experience, this confrontation with death or near death and mortality, showed that to me in a way that left an imprint, obviously, that has stayed with me since then. Yeah, so that was a pretty difficult experience to go through, and kind of the traumatic fallout, the PTSD, the binge eating, the food addiction, the maladaptive and self-destructive behaviors that I didn't fully understand.
It helped you to reconsider your life, even when it was really tragic.
Yes. So I would say this, I would not remove that experience from my life. So a lot of people, they say that was a terrible thing to go through. And maybe we have this idea that sometimes that life is supposed to be good, and I think actually it's through the most difficult hardships that we discover who we are, who we're not, what our limitations are, what really matters to us, how fragile we are as human beings, how fragile life actually is. I wouldn't be doing the work I do today if I didn't go through that experience. I was probably I'm not going to say I was necessarily arrogant, but look, I've got a pretty good brain. I got it free of charge, but I'm a pretty smart guy. I was pretty successful. I was doing a lot of things that people would... I was pretty privileged in a sense. So I'll just put it that way. And all of a sudden, like, none of that stuff mattered. Even it didn't matter how smart I was, didn't matter how capable I was. Like, I was just utterly lost and kind of devastated. But it's in those experiences that we figure out, like, what we're really made of, but also who God really is. And maybe isn't the one that we first thought or first met when we first began attending church or whatnot, but in a much more personal and intimate and difficult way. We are wired for struggle. It's not that we look for struggle. It's not that we ask for it. But hard experiences work something into us that good times never can. And so it's not that we ask for them, but I can think about, like, there's other sort of major life experiences from, like, losing everything in bankruptcy to suffering a crippling injury in a cycling accident. All of these things, they kind of forge us. And each one of these things has added to who I am as a person, my understanding of life, difficulty, and suffering in such a way that I can connect with people in a way that I never could before because of my lived experience. It's not so much about my formal education and, as I call them, the pieces of paper with my name on it. It's about the education I've received in the University of Life. And so I think every experience, when handed over to God, isn't a wasted one.
Our guest this week is Jonathan McLernon. We are ending here with this episode, and he will be back very soon. Please stay updated. Please consider subscribing to make sure you do not miss the next.